Hello everyone, welcome to Good Journeys Tarot. This is Rosemary, and today we are going to be talking about that infamous soul deck idea. This has been a subject that's come up on a lot of channels. Most recently, today on Benebell Wynn's channel, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. For me, I've never had one deck that pretty much summarized life for me, and the meaning of existence, or at least my understanding of existence, or that connected to me personally, in the way that people talk about their soul decks. For me, it's been more or less 5 decks, and I have been able to relate them to the Rosy Cross. This is my version of the Rose Cross, which is based on a couple of different things. And one day I'll do a great video about my Wheel of Correspondence that's based on this, but I don't have the technical skills yet. So before I digress, let's just hop into this. So the idea here is that, of course, the tarot is associated with 5 elements. You've got your air, fire, water, and earth, and then spirit or ethos or ether. And so I actually have 5 decks that I work with on a regular basis that I love, and they really kind of relate to these 5 areas in my life. And so I'm going to come back to this deck last, because it is the deck that relates to the ether or spirit. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But let's start with air, and we will work our way back around up to earth. So my air deck, that deck that makes me think, that really relates to thinking and examination and kind of critical review of myself and my spiritual path, as well as my life in general, is going to be the Spirit Keeper's Tarot. And it is very clear to me about matters, and it provides so much information and areas for me to go back and research later, which is why I always associate it with air. And I am actually looking forward to the new version of this deck, which is the Revelation, which will be arriving in several weeks. Some of the cards in it are going to be an improvement, and some of the cards in it are about the same. They're just color. I will say that the cards are beautiful in color. I think the only card from this edition of the deck to the new deck that didn't make it was the New World Order. The New World Order in this deck was just one of my favorite cards, and it did not make it into the Vitruvian, and it did not make it into the last one. But this is the only card which hasn't maintained in some form what I love about this deck throughout. And I think because I related more to this New World Order card than the card that is in the newer decks. But again, this is the deck that I associate with intellect, with learning, with critically examining my life, and really is a deck that requires me to do a lot of study, and that's why I associate it with air. The fire deck is going to be the Bonestone and Earth Flash. And it's not just because of the red gilding, which I love. I thought that was the perfect addition to this deck. But it's just because when I read with this deck, it always gives me such creative inspiration, and it exudes so much passion. And so right now I'm using this deck to work with the moon phases throughout the year, and thoroughly love working with it. There is just so much beauty in this deck. It really is a inspiring deck, and I just keep getting this fiery energy from it, no matter which card I pull. That just really drives my passions and my curiosity and creativity, and just really gets me going. This is probably my favorite Five of Cups ever. Just a gorgeous card. So yeah, that would be my Bone-Stone and Earth Flesh, my fire deck. And then my water deck. So my water deck is actually the Fyodor Pavlov. I've really connected with this emotionally, and it's also become a deck that I work with love and romance and relationships. In fact, I have done I did some beautiful magic with this recently in my own life. And I think it's because this deck was so inclusive, and it kind of, I could see myself in it. It has this romantic feeling, like it's based in the same time period as the imagery from the Waite Smith, but there are people of color, there are people who are gender queer as well as trans, and so for me, I just really connected with this deck on an emotional level. I really have no fault with anything in this deck except for the Judgment card, which reminds me a little bit too much of a traditional death card. It's just gorgeous. And so, like I said, I have actually been able to do some really great relationship magic with this deck, and am loving working with that. And that brings me to my Earth deck, which oddly enough, I would have thought would have been my emotional deck, but that is going to be the Numinous Tarot, which is becoming one of my fast favorites. I work with this all the time now, and am constantly pulling it out. I draw a lot of tomes in this deck. It just seems to really speak to my everyday life, and to my finances, to my job, as it were. And so I just have really felt like an earthy deck to me, even though I really thought it would be much more emotional for me, because it is specifically designed to be gender fluid or non-binary in the way that it approaches the tarot, hence the renaming of the suits and some of the major arcana and the court cards. But yeah, it just really is a grounding deck for me. And I just love the imagery. So the last deck I'm going to talk about will probably change eventually, and that's the deck that I associate with Spirit. This deck speaks clearly about everything. All kinds of topics, and I immediately understand it when I pull it out. And that's probably because I'm the most familiar with it. So in that way, I guess that's why it really resonates with me. But I wouldn't call it a soul deck, because there are many, many things about it that I would love to change. And that's part of why I'm creating my own deck currently. And sharing that study and the mock-ups on Instagram and YouTube is because I think there is room for improvement. And when Benebell did her video earlier today, which I'll post in the description below, she was talking about the Spirit Keepers as her soul deck, and how, it was that because she poured so much of herself into it, and it represents her worldview and her path. And I think that's part of why any tarot reader attempts to do their own deck. And I couldn't help but think, as she was talking, that she was talking about creating a Horcrux for you Harry Potter fans, but in a less violent way, leaving a piece of your soul in your creation, which is part of the reason that I am doing my own deck, mainly based on the Smith Waite, which is what is in here, is because I do enjoy working with this deck, but there are a lot of things I think could be improved upon, not just modernized, but inclusion-wise, and whatnot. Let's see. Where is... Oh, there we go. And I think you're all familiar with this deck. This is the Centennial, which I edged in gold, and I love the colors. I just find this easier and easier to read every year. And while I am basing my own deck on this imagery to a degree, there are some things I'm definitely swapping up, and I'm going to switch out because I feel like it's more meaningful to me. I'm trying to find moments in my life that express what's going on in these cards. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the deck that really started it all. It wasn't this actual deck, but these images that started my study of the tarot and have gotten me down the path to where I am right now. And so that's why it's one of the 5 decks, I would say, are part of this soul team, as it were, for me right now. And and I think that's because I've spent so much time reimagining it and seeing what it is that I want in a deck. And honestly, I'm actually adding all of these other things. Like, I have been trying to add, correspondences for Kabbalah and for the astrological, etc., to my imagery that was not in the Waite Smith, even though it was implied, it wasn't actually visible. I am adding gender diversity and inclusion, and I actually am also looking at possibly renaming some cards. Just because, as Benebell talked about in one of her recent videos, as we, as a global consciousness, change our view on things, shouldn't our tarot change to adapt to the global consciousness, right? Like, what was meaningful in the 1700s or the 1500s is not necessarily meaningful today. Whether it be the terminology or the ideas, which no longer exist on a global scale. So these are my thoughts right now on soul decks, or the soul team, as it were, in my case. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these or decks that you find particularly meaningful in your journey. Until next time, good journeys.